Martin's Violin Shop in North Canton, Ohio. I've been rehairing bows since about 1971, and throughout my career I've rehaired about 10,000 bows. The first 1,000 bows that I rehaired, I utilized what's called the tip first method. I was never satisfied with my results, and one day I tried rehairing a bow from the frog first, and been using that method ever since. I'm totally satisfied with the results that I've been receiving. Upon receiving the bow for a rehair, its quality and condition must be determined. Quality can vary greatly. One will be asked to rehair bows at almost no value, and others valued up to maybe $20,000 or more. It's important to realize one's abilities compared to the quality of the bow that one is working on. The beginner rehair person should attempt only working on inexpensive bows. The utmost care and experience must be utilized when rehairing expensive bows, as bows are easily damaged. Most high-quality bows are made from Pernambuco. Pernambuco resembles mahogany, being a red-orange color. Brazil wood, which most inexpensive bows are made from, has the appearance of walnut. It has a coarser grain and it is darker brown. Pernambuco and Brazil wood are said to be from the same species. Sometimes it is hard to tell them apart. If I see a good quality bow and cannot determine if the wood is made from Pernambuco or Brazil wood, I will err to the side of calling it Pernambuco. The bow must be inspected in front of the customer. Any and all flaws should be pointed out and documented. I have considered taking photos of the bows in the customer's hands to prevent disputes. I look at everything on the bow. Look carefully at the head. Look to see if there are any cracks or repairs to the head. I then look down the stick, rotating the bow to cover every square inch of the stick to make sure there are no hidden cracks. Rosin and dirt buildup can and have hidden cracks that have caused problems for me in the past. Note the fit of the frog on the stick, along with the operation of the screw. There are a lot of problems that can be hidden, so look very carefully. Note any chips or damage to the frog, especially the rail or side of the mortise. Cracks are usually on the sides and have to be addressed. I also will sight down the stick to determine its straightness and camber. Camber is the curve this way, and basically the straightness I'm looking to a left or right. Most bows will need some type of straightening or repair work along with the rehair. These repairs are beyond the scope of this instruction video. Discuss with the customer the type and quality of the hair they desire. Also ask if they have any other requirements for the rehair. Some players desire hair to be loaded on one side of the bow more than the other. Ask the customer if they want the hair rosin. If so, what kind of rosin? I utilize several different types of bow hair. Sometimes it is hard to tell them apart, and I'm at the mercy of the supplier to give me what I order. Argentine hair is generally coarser. I recommend it for fiddle players, cellists, or anyone else that desire a strong, coarse tone. Mongolian hair is generally the smoothest, giving a smoother tone. Russian and Siberian hair are in the middle, and sometimes considered to be of the highest quality. These are all generalizations because the hair quality will vary from batch to batch. Let's go downstairs and start a rehair and see how we can do with this today. The first thing I do is to remove the hair from the bow. The first step is to cut the hair with the frog end. I then remove the frog from the stick and place the frog and screw in an old rosin box. The next step is to pull the hair out of the tip of the bow. I pull the hair back to expose the wooden plug. Some plugs remove easily and others are very difficult. I use a straight flat chisel that is about 3 millimeters wide to gently pry out the plug. Most of the time, if they're glued in, it takes a little more than just prying. This one will pry out very easily. Pry out the plug and put it in the box with the other fittings. This is almost not necessary at the present. Pull the hair out. Usually there should be no glue. This bow has glue. Okay, the hair's pulled out. and I then discard the hair. If the plug will not remove easily, I basically will use the same tool and chip or carve the plug out. The head and tip plates are very fragile, so be careful. Ideally, the hair plug will pull out easily. Sometimes further work with the chisel is necessary. After the hair is removed, I verify that the inside of the mortise is clean. Using the chisel, I carefully remove any glue, residue, or hair that is still in the bow. And this particular one has very soft, gooey glue, and take a little bit of extra effort to get it out. Make sure all the glue and things are out of the bow. A lot of bows, especially poorly made ones, will need further work inside the mortise. The inexpensive ones will not have flat sides, so it's okay to carve a little bit of the wood to make everything nice and smooth. Never recarve the mortise of an expensive bow. I have seen bows almost destroyed by a heavy-handed repair person altering a mortise as they saw fit. If the ivory tip plate is loose, it is okay to use a little bit of super glue to make the repair. I use the Loctite brand super glue. It works very well. Just make sure you clean off any residual glue, because it will make a mess if you don't. The next step is to clean the stick. Purell hand cleaner works wonders and will remove most dirt and rosin buildups. Be careful, because it can also remove the finish on some bows. I've seen professional bow makers use alcohol to strip the finish or polish from a fine old bow. If you use this method to remove the finish, it must be repolished after it is cleaned. Once the bow is cleaned, it is now time to polish the stick. Most makers polish with spirit varnish and boiled linseed oil. They never refer to it as a varnish. I will never remove an old finish from a bow. Another method of cleaning is to abrade the rosin away with a coarse automotive style polish cleaner. Just a little bit on the cloth, make sure it's not all over the place, and clean the bow. 3M products work very well. Okay, at this point, I will check the bow for straightness. If it is badly out of alignment, I will make the corrections at this time. Then bring the bow over to the other bench and I check the bow for straightness. If it's badly out of alignment, I will make corrections at this time. I place a heat directing hood on top of my electric hot plate, and then I will visually divide the bow into 3 sections. I call the tip end number 1, the center section number 2, and the frog end number 3. The in-between areas are referred to as 1, 2, and 2 and 3. I note where the corrections need to be performed, and sometimes we'll mark it with a pencil or chalk. So if the head is bent here, I will mark it so that as it's heated, I will know exactly where to bend it at. If the area is heated, being very careful not to scorch the finish or wood. I use a bending jig to press the bow against during the bending process. I never bend freehand, having broken too many bows that way. I will only approximate the corrections, returning later after the bow rehair is completed to make the final adjustments. Some corrections can only be made while the bow is under tension. I then polish the stick with gum benzoin dissolved in alcohol. I dip a piece of cloth into the solution. Then I place a drop of mineral oil on the cloth. The stick is rubbed briskly with the cloth. First I remove a little bit of chalk. This takes a long time to learn how to do properly. It wants to stick, and once it's nice and shiny, I stop, and then I set the bow aside to dry. It takes about 5 minutes to dry completely. If I'm replacing the wrap, I would have taken that off prior to cleaning and polishing the stick. I will not replace the wrap until after the rehair so that I can ensure a proper balance. My attention is now applied to the frog, so I will gently grab the ferrule with my wood-lined vice jaws and gently pull it off of the frog. Great care must be taken because the ferrule can be damaged very easily. Also, the front or tongue of the frog can break. Chalk placed on the area of the vise where it contacts the ferrule will greatly reduce the amount of pressure required to grab the ferrule. Never use pliers to remove the ferrule. I then remove the spreader wedge. Usually it is glued on. I place the frog on a flat surface, pearl slide down. I use my bench knife to remove the wedge, placing it between the ebony and the white piece of the wedge. Generally, a little bit of downward pressure is always needed to pop the wedge loose. The next step is to remove the pearl slide. I place the frog in my rehair jigs vise. Generally, a little bit of thumb pressure will remove the slide. But most of the time they're in there pretty tight because the ebony has condensed a little bit and they're very tight. I then will prepare a piece of masking tape about 3 inches long. I adhere it to the slide, and a little bit of thumb pressure and tension on the masking tape generally will pull the slide out. So in this case it came out very nicely. Once the slide is removed, the hair plug is removed in much the same way as a tip plug. I always save the plugs. If properly rehaired the last time, the frog plug can be reused. Rarely am I able to reuse a tip plug. I then polish the metal fittings. There are 2 types of abrasive polish that I use. One I refer to as my white or bone polish. It is good for polishing the parts that are not removable from the frog. I rub the metal parts with a polish impregnated leather-lined paddle that I've made from a discarded file cleaning card. Most metal polishes have color in them which can get into the pores or crevices of the ebony. Then I polish the sides of the metal pieces, and if everything looks good, I will then just gently use a flannel cloth to clean off the residue. The next step is to polish the ferrule. I place the ferrule on an old jeweler's file, half round, and use the same paddle. I put my hand on the back, or back of my hand on my jig, and then polish the ferrule. Usually flat first, and I flip it over and do the round. I use the same polish for nickel, silver, or sterling, or gold actually. It works well on all of them. Okay, pull the ferrule off, and then I will polish the front face. And basically the ferrule's done. The polish has wax in it, and that will assist in keeping the oxidation from the fingers and oils and acids from re-affecting the ferrule. And I will clean off everything as good as I can. The screws button can be polished 2 different ways. It can be held in the fingers and rubbed back and forth 1 facet at a time. There's 8 facets, so I generally do one for a couple seconds, then flip to the next facet, and I count as I go. And when I count to 8, I'm basically done with it. And then I finish the polishing process by rubbing the back face on the polishing device. Another way to polish the screw is to put it in the vise and polish 1 facet at a time. Rotate it. Generally, it's best not to over polish because a lot of bows are old and a lot of their character and value is their patina. So you just want to give them a basic cleanup and don't overdo it. The next step will be to select and prepare the hair to be inserted into the bow. Um, Generally, we'll take a break at this point, go clean my hands and get some fresh air. So let me go clean my hands and I'll be back to select and process the hair. Now my hands are clean and it's time to start selecting and preparing the hair to go into the bow. Okay, I purchased the horsehair by the pound. It's usually about 32 inches in length. I use premium grades of hair. The hair will come in a bundle tied with cotton string every couple of inches or so. I remove all but the last 2 loops of string, and it's going to be at the lighter end of the bundle. Okay, the lighter end is the hair that is closest to the horse's skin. I push those remaining loops close to the end of the bundle, leaving about 1/8 of an inch of hair protruding. I then dip the hair into hot hide glue and rub some into the end. Some rehairs will remove all the cotton string and use an automotive style hose clamp to hold the end of the hair. I store the hair with mothballs to prevent insect damage. There are 2 types of insects that eat bow hair. One is a moth larva, usually from a silvery pantry moth. So if you see a small silver moth fly by, catch it. Most likely it's on its way to find a place to lay eggs. The other insect is a carpet beetle larva. And one thing about those guys keep us in business. The size of the hank is determined by the type, strength, and sometimes weight of the bow. A strong bow can pull more hair tighter, although the bow may be too heavy with more hair. A weak bow must have less hair. When I first started rehairing bows, I thought I would put extra hair in the bow to give the customer extra value. This mistake must not be made. Too much hair will damage the bow, cause a muddy tone, and make the bow too heavy. It is better to err on the side of not enough hair than to use too much hair. I will use the graduated paddle to measure off the hair. It's usually a fairly easy thing to do. Pull it in and look to see how much I have here. So I got at least a good 10% extra. It's actually enough to do a cello bow, but we are doing a viola bow, so I grab a cello amount to begin with. Because like I said, at least 10% of this hair will be unusable. Simply snip it off, remove it from the bundle, get it out of my lap, bundle back. Okay, now we're going to take a real close look at this hair. Try to keep everything nice and close here. Now this is the closest end to the horse's skin. If you look closely, as I showed before, there is a difference. The hair is much thicker at this end, so this end will always go in the frog first. Okay, I'll take a closer look at the hair, and I look at each one. And if I see a bad one, which has little bumps and curls in it, I pull it out and it goes in the trash. Anything that's bad, pull it out, and I go through looking at each hair, and if I accidentally pull one out that's not bad, I just simply put it back in and I keep looking. I go through. This can be time consuming. If it's an inexpensive student bow, I'm probably not as particular, but a professional, I will go through the hair for them and remove anything that's not perfect. And once I inspect the hairs at this end, got one here, get it out of there. Look at this portion. Go through it much the same way. A few hairs at a time. When I spot one that's no good, I get rid of it. Keep looking. I check the hair at 4 different points. This is the second point, and I go to about here and repeat the process. And if I see one that's already colored, it's gone. And then the further you get toward the end of the hank, the more bad hairs you're going to find. For some reason, at the other end, there's lots of bad ones. And then the last step is to look at the very end. Okay, if I were to leave all these bad hairs in the bow, it would create a coarser tone or cause strange sounds. But the violinists think is their problem. It's the bow itself creating problems. Okay, that looks pretty good. It is amazing sometimes how many bad hairs there are. Once all the bad hairs are removed, I again gauge the hank to verify that I have the proper amount. Okay, now we got the proper amount of hair. You then take the hair and bend it and flick it a little bit, and any of the short ones will pull up, and I just basically make sure there are no short ones that I don't want to miss them. Okay, so I will now just set this over my bench and grab my thread and pull off about 10 inches, cut it off, pull on another 10 inches and cut that off. Okay, and then basically I will be done with the thread at this point, or at least from the spool. Okay, I take and I make 2 slip knot nooses from these pieces. Make one simple turn, then take this and put it inside and tighten that. So these are slip knots. And make 2 of these. One for the tip and one for the frog. Okay, the thread that I used is made by the Coats Company. It is 26% cotton, 74% polyester. Okay, once the slip knots are produced, I get the hair in my left hand, slip it over the hair, make sure all the hairs are inside, and grab it with my teeth at one end of the knot and basically pull it tight. Okay, at this point I put the frog inside my little vise, and I observe the depth of the mortise. Okay, now the deeper the length of the mortise. The longer the mortise, the more turns I put on this. So I go around several times and do a simple knot here. Pull tight with my teeth again. Go around a few more times. Repeat that procedure. Okay, this is a fairly long mortise. Few more turns. Okay. I'll do a double knot at this point. Okay, cut the hair off, usually over my trash can, but sometimes right here, about 1 millimeter away from the loops. I cut the thread off. Okay. At this point, I grab my Loctite super glue, place a drop right on the very tip. Be careful, because if you put too much on, it will soak through the knot and damage or destroy this, and I have to start all over again. A little bit on the thread. Okay, set my glue down, then I grab a pair of pliers. I only use these pliers just for this because they get fouled with glue and they're useless for anything else. And then I smash or compress the knot flat. I got a little bit of glue on there, but this is not too bad because it didn't soak it all the way through. But generally, that will not pull apart. Some repair persons will dip the hair in powdered rosin and burn it on the alcohol lamp. Generally, I find I don't have to do that method with the super glue. Okay, the reason I use the polyester cotton combination thread is that if it was just cotton thread, when I compressed it, the cotton thread will just break right open. And if I use just a straight polyester thread, when it's burnt, which sometimes I do still use that method, it will just melt the thread and it all falls off. So the combination cotton polyester works very nicely. Okay, the next step is to verify that the frog mortise is cleaned out and that it's ready to accept the hair. So that all cleaned out. Then I check the hair to see if I got the proper length. It's very important to have this proper length or it won't go in there. I use a small screwdriver to push the hair into the mortise. Basically right now I'm just testing to see if I got the right size. Okay, it's a little long, it won't lay flat, so I take it out and trim a very small amount off of the end. Okay, the next step is to place the ferrule over top of the hair. There's little facets, and that goes over first. I put the hair in the mortise until it's flat in the bottom, and then if the plug is still good, one that I saved, I will put it in and utilize it again. This plug is not good. You see that it's kind of chippy and disformed. It was glued in previously, so chances are it didn't fit well, and they did a poor job. So I will not reuse this. So let's make another plug. There are several different types of materials that can be used for plugs. I've seen willow, poplar, maple, bamboo, basswood, walnut, mahogany, pine, plastic, glue, screws, nails, you name it. I've seen different things put in bow frogs. There may be others that I can't remember. I choose maple for my plugs. Most rehair persons use and recommend poplar. Poplar is a little softer, it's easier to work, and more forgiving than the maple. If a poplar plug does not fit properly, it will compress and not damage the bow. I recommend it for the novice bow rehair. I choose old stable wood to make my plugs. The wood is prepared as sticks, several inches long. The strips are approximately 10 millimeters, 3/8 inches wide, or 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch thick for violin, viola, and most cello bows. I have strips of various sizes for bass bows. I try to make the strips quarter sawn with straight grain with no runout. I removed the frog temporarily from the vise and put the strip of wood in the vise so that I can cut off a section to make the tip plug. This is a fresh plug stick, so I have to make 2 cuts. There's a slight angle, so bend this back a little bit. Cut this off. So if you look at that, you see it's angled. Okay, this angle I make to match the back of the frog mortise. Okay, so I make one more cut. That was just to prepare the front angle, and then I still angle the back. And what's nice about this is at the same time I'm preparing the front angle for the next plug. Side. Okay, so this is the rough plug. Okay, next I'm going to check the plug for runout. I do that by trimming off some of the top. And generally, if there's a lot of runout, it will make this wedge shaped. See, it's thicker on the front than it is the back. So to get that straight, I have to take off more on one side. So what I do is then I flip it over and do the same thing on the back side. Okay. And now what I've done is made the top and the bottom relatively parallel. Okay. Now I recheck the angle inside the frog to verify that I have the right angle on the plug. It's kind of difficult to see, but you know, this is tapered inward. So if you were to see it, it would be shaped like that inside. Okay, and I verify that I have this plug also shaped to match that inside. I'll put the frog back in my vise. Okay, the next step is to make the width dimensions proper. This is like twice as wide as it should be. Most likely I can get 2 plugs out of this one. And just take a general visualization. I've done this so many times I can tell that's about 5 millimeters wide. And this is over 10, so I'll just cut it right down the center. Since it's quarter sawn, this will split right open. Or should. Okay, so now I've got 2. Okay. place one to the side for the next bow. Okay, at this time I determined where the top of the plug is going to be. Okay, I'm going to make this the top, so I will trim the sides. Sides are slightly tapered, so that means it's a little thinner at the bottom than it is at the top, but they are parallel. Okay, the next step is to see if I've got the proper width. I just kind of eyeballed it. So I stick my knife in it and basically test fit it in the mortise. It's very snug. If this were a poplar plug, I could leave it there because it would compress. A maple plug, I cannot leave that tight. So I trim off a little more. It's okay, so this goes in very snug. Okay, so the next step is to establish thickness, or this dimension from the top to the bottom. And that I determine by how deep the mortise is. And this particular one is very deep, so probably keep this pretty much as thick as it is presently. So I grab a half round chisel, approximately a 6mm by number 8 sweep, and I hollow out the bottom. Okay, now sometimes it's hard to figure out where the top was, but I've got the knife poke in it, so I know exactly where I'm at. Okay, the front will always be tapered this direction. I then put it against the bench and make a round cut along the bottom of it. The reason for the round cut is that when it's inside the mortise, it goes around the knot on the hank. Okay, so the next step is to make it or trim it to length. Okay, there again I put it in and kind of visualize things, and it appears I have to trim off about 3.5mm or so. Basically make sure I'm cutting the right surface. And the end grain is very hard to cut. That's not impossible. You just have to take small cuts, one at a time. And these will also be angled because the other face or the back of the mortise is usually angled also. Sometimes they're flat. Okay, so what I do now is do a test fit again. And we're still too long. Okay. This should do it. Okay. Okay, now the other thing that's important, I'll go ahead and lift this up, is you have to have the proper amount in front of the plug so that the hair can come up and around and over top of it. And we won't know for sure if we got that until the hair is in and we push the plug down and see how it goes. And we usually at this point we'll leave it a little bit long because we're going to be trimming some off. Okay, so I remove the plug, put this back in the vise. Okay, there's 2 more trimmings I need to do to this. Okay, the front surface, I trim a little bit off this edge, just a little facet, just to where the hair will come up and around so it's not hitting the sharp edge. I don't think that's totally important, but I still do that. And the other one is to cut a little bit of a 45 off the back. And what this little notch does is allows that corner to miss the top of the mortise as it's sliding down in to hold the hair in. Okay, so that's basically complete. And the next step is to put the hair in the bow. They're going to use the little screwdriver, push the hair down in. Okay, I'll give you a picture of that, now it will get on. The hair's sitting in the bottom of the mortise. Okay, this is very important that this fits perfectly because it is maple and it will damage the bow if it not fit perfectly. If this were poplar wood, we've got lots of compression room. Okay, I have a tool for pushing these in, which I made. broom handle with a little piece of ebony. I find that I don't use this very often. The screwdriver comes in very handy. Okay, basically hold the hair back, gently push it in, and okay, I can tell that I have to remove some wood. I didn't leave enough room in front, so I just repeat the process by trimming a little bit off the back of the plug. Okay, now before I go any further, I usually get a little bit of powdered rosin and place it in mortise. This adds a little bit of friction and so forth to hold things together. And I guess on a real inexpensive bow, a little bit of glue wouldn't hurt, but it's not recommended. Okay. We're still a little bit snug, and it's very tight, or so it's a little difficult to get back out. Okay, this should be the last cut, but if it takes all day to do this, you need to do it right. So just be very careful, take a little bit at a time. If you cut it too short, it won't hold, and you got to start all over again. Okay, it's going nicely. Okay. Next step is to see actually how well of a job I did putting that plug in. Okay, it's a little bit tricky to get this hair out. What I do, I'll make sure the frog is tight in here. You can't really go too tight or else you can break the frog. So just make sure it's snug. Kind of grab a hold of the frog, pull on this plug. Definitely more tension than the bow itself will pull on it. Okay, this is never going to pull out. Just inspect it one more time. Everything looks good. Okay, next we install the slide back in. You have to be very careful when installing the slide because there's a wider end and a narrower end. It doesn't look like it, but generally this end is narrow. It goes to the back of the frog. Usually, if you forget which end is which, the front will have more ebony protruding out from under the mother of pearl. Okay, at this point I also make sure that there's no wax or polish under this middle piece, because if there is, the slide won't go in all the way. It's very important when pulling the hair up at this point to make sure that the hair is the proper amount, because if I got too much hair in here, I can trim some off without pulling that plug back out. So there are little rails, or what I call a frog throat, that the hair must pass through. And if there's too much hair, it won't leave enough room for the slide, and you will break the sides of the frog if you have too much hair and you try to force the slide in. The other thing is, if you put the slide in backwards, you will also break the sides of the frog because it just won't fit properly. Okay, and make sure the ferrule's still in here. One thing about the tip or frog first method, you will never forget to put the ferrule on, or if you do forget, it's no big deal, you just thread it back over. In the tip first method, probably every other time I rehair the bow, I accidentally left this off and had to pull that plug out, which is not a terribly difficult thing to do, but it's just annoying to have to redo that process again. Okay, so let's get the slide on. This looks like we have the proper amount of hair. Hold hair tight, push it down in, and make sure there is no hair on top of the sliding surfaces. And verify that with a little tool to go in. Okay, it looks good. Finish the slide all the way in like so. Okay, then simply pull the ferrule up into position and push it in place. Make sure it doesn't go on backwards. There again, there are little facet marks on the front, and if it's backwards, it would be obvious. Okay. The next step is to prepare and install the spreader wedge. Most rehair persons will prepare and install the spreader wedge as one of the last procedures. I choose to make and install it now before the hair is combed, while the hair is yet not tied or installed at the tip of the bow. Before I make the wedge, I make sure that there are no short hairs. Okay, basically I grab the hair at the end near the tip, pull a little bit taut and shake it, and if there's any short hairs, they will fall loose. I don't have any this time. Let me back up a little so we can see what a loose one does. Okay, still don't have a loose one. Okay, there we go. See, the loose one will just pull down. I usually just grab it and make sure that I get it out of the way. Okay. Okay, this can also be done before the hair is inserted into the bow. I just usually do it at that point. Okay, usually spreader wedges are made from poplar. Okay, here again, I choose to make mine from walnut. Walnut is stronger than poplar and is less prone to compress. Thus, more care must be taken to fit the walnut wedge properly. I recommend that the novice bow rehair person start out using poplar. The wedge material is prepared in much the same way as the plug material. I make sticks several inches in length. They're approximately 15 millimeters or about 3/4 of an inch wide by 1.5 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch thick. I plane smooth the side that will be against the hair. Okay, ideally the grain will be straight and with no runout. A lot of times it's impossible to get the wood perfect, and if I find that I have a piece that's not very good, I just discard it and grab another one. Be careful when pushing in the wedge. It must fit perfectly with little insertion pressure. The bottom of the ferrule can be bent, and that's a sure sign of an improper bow rehair. The ferrule can also be split open on the edges. I begin fitting the wedge by narrowing the wedge stick with my bench knife. I take and cut it to about the thickness of the opening, and here again it's just close. Okay, then cut 45 degrees on each side, slightly at an angle. For a base bow, I compress the wood first in my vise. I don't want the hair to pull to the sides or pull to the inside. A base bow pulls really hard and it will compress, so I basically will put this in my vise and crush it. Not with this vise, but with my heavy duty bench vise to compress the fibers ahead of time. Okay, I then check to see how thick the wedge must be. I look at this opening and compare it to what I have here. This is a fairly wide opening, so I'll take and look at it ahead of time before I do any more cutting. Okay, this is good. I'm not going to trim this thin. Okay, I place the frog in the vise on its end. I have a piece of leather in the bottom so that it will not damage the frog. And at this point, I also have to be careful because the contours aren't fitting very nice and you can damage things. So it's just in there. If I want to, I can pull it out. So it's just barely snug. I will trim a little bit off of this to thin it out slightly or make a uniform taper. I take the wedge and do a test fit. First, I use the side of my spreader wedge and flatten the ribbon in the bottom of the ferrule. Test fit. Okay, check to see what it looks like. So far, so good. Push it in a little bit more. And what I'm doing now is marking the sides at the exact place they need to be. Poplar wood, you can just push it in and almost be done with it. But this is a little bit stiffer wood, so we're going to trim it with our knife. And there's that. Okay, repeat this process. Make sure it's in the right direction. Gently push it in, making sure that everything is nice and tight. Grab my super glue, place a small drop right here. Very careful, you don't want to make a huge mess. Then I push this in the rest of the way, being very careful, having done this thousands of times to know how much pressure to take or push. I grab a paper towel and wipe off excess glue. This next step is very important to do it properly and take one's time. I use an X-Acto saw that has no kerf on it, so there's no side action to this saw blade, and it's very dull. I do not want to damage the silver or the gold or anything on the bow, but it will still cut through the wood. Be very careful. Make sure the light is on so you can see exactly what you're doing. Place it flat on the edge of the ferrule and gently saw. And do not go all the way through. This again takes practice to know how far you're in. You see this start to wiggle, then you know it's almost through, and just gently break it loose. Okay, I'll show you what that looks like. There is a little bit of broken fibers and things sticking out. And also I have a step on here. I generally purposefully leave that step so that I'm not going to come close to the metal with the saw. I'll push the hair over top of the fibers, take my knife and carefully trim those away. Okay. And if there's any overhang on the sides, they usually break away. Okay, at this point, I use my chisel to clean off any excess glue that might be there. Okay. We are almost done. And the final step to the frog is to split the ribbon in 2 equal spots and grab it about 6 to 8 inches away. Get a good hold on it and pull tight. Do the same thing on this one. This will usually pull out approximately 1 millimeter. See, I can see the mark there, so what I've done in that last process was to remove the slack that was underneath the slide. It's a very important thing to do. It just makes the hair more uniform at the end of the job. With the rehair completed in the frog, it takes all the guesswork and so forth away, putting in the spreader wedge. This is very important that all these hairs are nice and uniform. They're still very uniform throughout the inside the frog. One other thing I didn't mention, when I'm pulling on the hair, if I pull too close, I will break the hairs. That's why I grab farther out, because if there's one that's a little taut, it will not break. So the frog end of this bow is completed, and this is the only method of rehairing that I know of that everything is completely done at the frog before I go any further. The next step is to prepare the tip end of the hair to be placed into the bow. I place the frog on the bow, install a screw loosely, a few turns. I then put the bow into the vise or rehair jig. I don't know if you've noticed much about my rehair jig, but it sets the bow up high to where I can everything's up high where I can work. All my tools are underneath. Tools, they can be everywhere and make a mess, but with them right here, I know exactly what I need, and there's nothing here that I don't use. And if it is there, eventually it gets taken away. At this point, I comb the hair. Some rehair persons will wet the hair before they comb it. I wait till later to wet the hair. I have 2 different combs. Both of these purchased at the pet supply shop. I don't know their exact purposes, but they work very well for what I'm doing. One is a metal comb, one is a plastic comb with fine and wide space teeth. I grab the metal comb first, start back here, and run it through. Generally, this end of the hair is where things are going to be a little tricky. Okay. Grab the fine tooth comb. Comb the hair. several times, and at this point also, if there's any short ones, I will find them. Okay, and once the ribbon is nice and tight, I'll grab it very strongly with my left hand, thumb, index finger, and then I will roll over the outsides of the hair and make a round bundle, basically just behind the mortise. Okay, I've got a death grip here. This I'm not going to let go of until I've got it tied. It's a little tricky to get used to tying this in. I grab it like that, slip this slip knot noose over it, grab it with my teeth and left hand, pull it tight, make sure my hair is not caught up on anything, and measure this dimension. Okay, generally 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the front of the mortise to the slip knot is what we want. So I'm real close now. Pull it back a little bit. Okay, so there's our dimension that we're looking for. Okay, at this point, pull the hair back up and out of the way, and tie the loops or lengthen the knot. Make a few turns, and then actually the same way as at the frog end. The biggest difference is that the tip mortises are not as deep, so we don't need as many turns. Only about 6 will do it. Tie your level, two knots, cut it exactly the same way I did for the frog end. And you have to be very careful, especially with my jig, to not getting the hairs tangled up in the tools or on here, because if you pull a couple, they will just ruin everything. You have to start all over again. Especially after this is cut, it's not possible, but you don't want any hairs being pulled out of that knot. Okay, at this point, I've still got good tight grip here. I run my comb into the hair, and very carefully not to put any tension on anything. Okay, and pinch the knot, pull this up a little closer, put a drop of glue. Remember, just a drop, because too much you will definitely soak it up and ruin the hank. And this is a lot of work to get to this point. And again, I have to be careful not to have any hairs caught in my apparatus here. And grab the pliers and squeeze it flat. Okay, usually, well, this would be stuck on my fingers, but it comes off easily enough. Okay, now quickly comb it one more time. And at this point, if I made some mistakes, it'll be obvious. This will not be uniform. So everything looks nice, comes up to the point. This should be a successful rehair. Now, I'll pull the screw out, put it in the rosin box, grab the frog, rotate up and over, and hang it down beside my bench on my piece of wood and the hair jig. The next step is to prepare the tip plug. The tip plug is prepared very much the same way as the frog plug. The major difference is the tip plug has angles on the sides of it. So let's prepare a tip plug. It's made from the same wood as the frog plug, and very much the same procedures. I'll trim the plug top and bottom to verify there's no run out, and usually end up with the proper thickness. At this point, is where it changes fitting for a tip plug versus a frog plug. Generally, I start with cutting the angle to match the side of the plug mortise. I cut one side first. I just visualize that angle. Here again with maple plug, it has to fit perfectly. If this were poplar, it could be close, but it still would have to be oversized but close, and you can force things in and usually won't have any problems. So let's see how things are coming along. And the next step is to place this angle in the head of the bow and press, because what I'm doing is marking the other side with the mortise itself. So this corner goes down into the mortise, and the other one is kind of rubbed and rotated slightly. I don't know if we can get that in there or not, but there's a slight mark right there to show me how wide this needs to be. Okay, and then cut it at that mark, sometimes a little bit over. Match the sides. Okay, so this is what we got so far. Use the knife, poke into it, and do a test fit. At this step, we have to make sure everything is perfect. This is where most rehair jobs fail, is the tip plug pulls out. So I do the undercut to go on top of the hair. And at the same time, I'm setting the depth of this mortise, or the plug for the mortise. Okay, we'll round it underneath. Again, I'll show you why. So that when it's inside the bow, it fits nicely over top of the hair plug. I'll put this back on my knife, look at it, and see how much it needs to be shortened. It's approximately 2 millimeters. So very much the same way as the frog plug, trim it away. Generally you can just trim one side because everything kind of works together. Let's see, we're getting farther into the mortise. Check a look, see where I need to be. Trim a little more off the back. And I think this is going to be a little too thick, so I grab my half round chisel, cut a little bit more off of the bottom. What we're doing is just trial and error until we get it right. And there again, I've done this like used three different times to make a plug. If it's not right, it's not right. It has to, if you make it too small, you have to start all over again. So if you take your time and do it right, everything usually comes out nicely. Yeah, I believe I have the length proper. It's still a little bit wide. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Just make sure everything looks perfect, and take one more little cut. Okay, as with the frog plug, I want to trim a little bit off of here, off of the front bottom edge, and then also we'll take off the back facet here so that it slips in a little easier. Grab the hair. A lot of times my knot will be in the way, so I simply just cut the knot away with the super glue. It's not going to come apart. And this is the first test to see how it fits in the mortise. So you gotta make sure you have it in the right direction. I'm so accustomed to picking this up that I know I'm right, but if you're not sure, put the hair on the bow and realize that it's got to go in this direction. And with the comb still on it, I push the hair down into the mortise, the rosin on my screwdriver, put it in the mortise, stir it around, get it on the sides and into the hair. Plug it into place. Grab the right screwdriver and push the plug in. Okay, now we'll grab the special tool for pushing this plug down. Gently push and check and look at things and make sure nothing's binding. Now the plug is still a little bit too large. Take a real close look to see where it's too large at. I think it's primarily too long. Pull it back out, be very careful so that I don't disturb anything else. Trim a little bit more. Make sure it's still right. Into place. Sometimes just thumb pressure will hold it in. I now set the hair in the tip. I raise the frog above the tip, place my thumbnail on the wedge and pull quite firmly, but not so hard that I'm going to damage something. I will now trim the excess wood that's protruding over top of the tip, being very careful not to cut hair or damage the ivory. I don't go totally flat in the front. I want a little step for the hair to come up and over. And everything, if it's all perfect. I'll put the frog in the mortise. It should ideally just clear the front of the mortise at this time. One step I do next is to take some lubricant. I make this lubricant from Vaseline and beeswax. It's a 50-50 mix. It works good for lots of things. I originally made this concoction for mustache wax. I found that it works very good for this also. And it's natural type of thing that it's not going to harm anything. The only thing you don't want to do is get it on the hair. So I put a little bit on the surfaces of the where the frog slides, a little bit on the end of the stick. I'm not worried about getting a little extra because it is a natural thing that's not going to hurt anybody's hands. It's actually probably be good. Notice I put it on the screw, a little bit on the shank. Careful not to get any on the hair. And then just pull up the tension to a plain tension. Well then, you gotta take a towel, wipe off the excess lubricant. Actually, a little bit of that lubricant will polish the ebony. I set the hair once again, being careful not to break anything, the fragile head, and I just tug it a little bit. Most violin bow rehair persons will be done at this point. I take it 2 more steps. First thing I do, I pinch the hair and slide my fingers down it. And you can see I got a lot of loose hairs here. Grab my lighter, light the alcohol lamp, and I singe these loose hairs only at the ends, not in the center. And I'm very careful not to burn any of the hairs. If you hear a little sizzle or crackle, that means you burnt one, and that hair has to be removed because it will break as soon as it's used. Now those hairs are drawn up tight. Leave my alcohol lamp on. Do the same thing from the frog to the tip. You see there's more loose hairs. Singe them and they draw up nice and tight. You don't have to be absolutely perfect at this time. One of the final things I do to the bow is set and relax the hair. As it stands, some of the hairs are longer than the others. If it were to be rosined up and used right now, it would work just fine, but it just doesn't look as good as it will once I'm done with this procedure. I tighten the bow a little bit over playing tension, which would be half an inch of tension. Turn on my water. As soon as the water is hot, I wet the hair. I'm careful not to get too much water on everything. It's unavoidable to get it on things, but semi-careful. And I can actually feel the hair stretching as it's getting wet. Generally, 2 or 3 passes is all it needs. And if we take a look at it now, notice that the space is much less than it was. Okay, I tighten it back up to playing tension. Strain off some of the water. And I grab a fresh clean paper towel, dry the hair. Okay, at this point, we go back over to the bench. So far, we've rehaired the bow, we've wet the hair, and retightened the bow. After it sits for a few minutes, the hair actually stretches further. So we tighten it up one more time to about playing tension. Take my fine-tooth comb, run it through the hair. At this point, I can generally tell how good the rehair went. If there's any crossed hairs or anything really out of place, I will correct those now. I run the hair through it, run the comb through the hair again, a couple different angles to make sure everything's nice and straight. Flip the hair. Generally, I'd almost be done. I would just take this bow with me upstairs and put it on my desk and just keep an eye on it. And as the hair dries, it will tension or put tension on the bow, so I have to loosen a little bit, keep an eye on it. And if I was to just tighten it up, let it dry, chances are it will bust the head off the bow or cause other problems. So as it's drying, you got to keep loosening it. And then if you have a customer waiting on the bow, generally just put it up to playing tension and dry it with a hair dryer. And this takes about 5 minutes. Okay, once the hair is dry by that method, it's ready for rosin. I have a nifty little way I use rosin. I take a standard cake that is in a cloth wrap. I take the cloth off and glue it onto a piece of plywood, and I'm able to use it down to the very end and without it breaking. I usually only rosin the bottom surface of the hair, and it takes a little while to do it thoroughly. You don't need too much rosin. If the customer needs a little more, put some more on. And I usually put my fingers under the hair while I'm doing it at this point. And as long as we got a nice thorough rosin, it should be great. Sometimes I will sight down the bow, make sure there's nothing totally out of place. That's all there is to it. Wipe off my fingerprints, a little bit of extra rosin. Sometimes I'll run the bow on the side of the bench to get some excess rosin to work it in. And, it's done, and it's a professional looking job, and will work very well. Here we have the bow completed. This is a viola bow, so let's test it on a viola. This method works very well for me. There are numerous ways and procedures to rehair a bow. Do what works best for you. I'm constantly modifying and changing the procedures. Hopefully this rehair method will serve you well. Again, my name is Joe Martin,